Awesome. Many of you guys know me. You see me around. My name is Pastor Emory. I'm on staff here at Manna Church. But you might be saying, hey, Emory, you know what? You look a little better on stage than you normally do. And you're absolutely right. And it's not because of anything that I've done, but it's because I have my better half joining me here on stage. My wife, Jessica. Come on, y'all make some noise for her. Yeah.
Hey, guys. I am so very grateful and so very nervous at the same time to be up here today. But this is truly God at work.
Yeah.
If they would have asked me 2 years ago to come up here on a Sunday morning, I would have been like, no, not about that life. It's not for me. It's not my ministry. You leave that to Emory.
There you go.
But here I am, and this is me growing, and this is me yielding myself to God for whatever He has called me to be.
Good. Good.
So I think we all want to grow. I think we all want to develop into the people that God has called us to be, but I'm not quite sure we know how to do that. And I'm also not sure if we see and understand the roadblocks and the distractions that come to us that causes us to hinder our growth and development. And that is what this series is all about. If you've been with us the last 2 weeks, you will recall we referenced an author by the name of Peter Scazzaro, who wrote a book entitled Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, where he outlines 4 levels of maturity. So we are not teaching this book, but the idea of this sermon series did come from this book. And we also liked his 4 levels of emotional maturity. Those 4 levels are the emotional infant, the emotional child, the emotional adolescent, and the emotional adult.
And maybe this is your first week with us in this series, and you just hopped in on week 3, and you're saying, I would love to hear about those levels of emotional maturity. Well, we're not going to touch on them in this message, but you can go back on our app or our website and start from the beginning in week 1, where there's a more detailed explanation of those 4 levels. But the real point here is threefold. The first thing is there are levels of emotional maturity. The second thing is we as individuals are likely all over the map. We're all over the place. We can find some parts of our lives over here and other parts of our lives over here. We can appear to be thriving and be healthy in one area, but in other areas of our life, we might face some challenges and some struggles. And why is this? It's because no one matures evenly in every area of his or her life. And 3, the biggest point is this: you can't develop spiritually beyond your level of emotional maturity. And as we were prepping for this series, we've been looking at different lists of characteristics of emotionally healthy people, and we saw a lot of the same characteristics overlapping on many of those lists, and so we narrowed it down to 6 characteristics, and those are self-awareness, faith, flexibility, which we'll talk about today, self-control, forgiveness, and generosity.
And if you remember last week, we shared a principle, and it came from 1 Corinthians, and I think that helped bring a little more clarity to it. And we'll take another look at that now. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 9, it says, "For we know in part, and we prophesy in part." So even what we receive from God is interpreted through our souls. And if we are not healthy emotionally, that's in our soul, we will not get a clear picture of God and what He has for our lives. And so hopefully we also gave an illustration last week, if you can recall, where you brew the world's greatest, best coffee, and you use the world's purest water to do it, but you ran it through a corrupted filter. And it distorted the taste. It ruined the taste of the coffee. And the sad thing is, you have the best coffee in the world, but you are never able to experience it for what it is because of that corrupted filter. And the same is true with God, the things of God, and God Himself. Yeah. If you run what you receive of God through the filter of an unhealthy soul, you will never get to experience the power of it for what it is.
That's good. And maybe you're sitting here and you say, hey, Pastor M, Jessica, I hear what you're saying, and I can identify some areas in my life where I am not emotionally mature. I'm not emotionally healthy. And if you can identify those things, then I would extend to say that you might be experiencing or might be showing some emotional health. But on the other hand, if you're sitting here and you're like, yo, this is all fine and dandy, but you're talking to the brother at the end of the road. Like, I'm good as I am. I don't need to change. Everybody in here, they need to get like me. I'm so awesome. Like, if that's you, then you might be experiencing some emotional unhealthiness, some emotional immaturity. Because if I can ask you right now, and you can tell me the areas of your life where you aren't emotionally healthy, that's a telltale sign of emotional health. And if you can't, then that lets me know that you're not so emotionally healthy. But here is the good news. We all are emotionally immature or unhealthy in some area of our life, but the even better news is that we can move forward into emotional health. Week 1 of this series, we looked at self-control. Week 2, self-awareness, Week 2, we looked at faith, and this week we're going to focus in on flexibility.
Right. The dictionary definition of flexibility is the quality of bending easily without breaking, the ability to be easily modified, and a willingness to change. And I think that this aspect of the definition, the willingness to change, is the one that hits closest to home because simply put, most people do not like to change.
Wait. What did you say there? Most people don't like to do what?
They don't like to change.
Okay. Everybody say change. Yeah, that's what we're digging into today, change and flexibility. Listen to this. If you're emotionally mature and are growing in your emotional health, it becomes a lot easier to identify the areas in your life where you aren't mature. But here's the challenge. What you decide to do now that you're aware that these areas need maturing. Again, being flexible comes down to your willingness to change, and it's all a part of you maturing emotionally. For example, I'm cold-natured. My wife, on the other hand, she's a bit more warm-natured. And so in our 7 years of marriage, going on 8 years, I still haven't figured out this mystery of the fans on in the wintertime with the heat on. It's not one fan. It's the fan by the bed, and it's the ceiling fan that sets the atmosphere. You can tell we've had this discussion before. I haven't been able to figure this out. You know, when I was a single man, I go to bed with tank top, basketball shorts, and I'm good. But now that I'm married, and we got the fans on in the wintertime, I'm going to bed with a hoodie, wool socks. I'm wrapped up like a burrito. Like this real talk.
No, it's not.
No, it is. But here's the thing. Would I make that decision to go to bed like that? Absolutely not. But the fact of the matter is that I'm considerate to what makes her comfortable. Is she good? Are you able to get a good night rest?
Sure am, surely. Great.
So, but because she can rest and that's the environment that she likes, I'm able to be flexible. I'm able to work with that. And I'm thinking of her needs and what works for her above my own self. My arrows are pointed outward versus inward. So when it's time to go to bed, I just go to the closet, grab my jacket, put my toboggan and gloves on. I just slide into bed. That's what it is.
And if y'all believe that, y'all are as crazy as that sounds.
Man, I slept in a hoodie 3 times.
You did not.
You was already asleep, so you didn't see it.
You did not. But flexibility, your willingness to change is so important in becoming emotionally healthy. Ultimately, it strengthens your spiritual healthiness.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what plans, dreams, or goals or aspirations that you have for your life, but I dare you to submit your will to God's will for your life and see if flexibility doesn't become the new rhythm of your life.
Wow.
And so trust me when I say this, that God's will is so much better for you. But because we are humans and we live in this fleshly bodies, we have to deny ourselves so that we can clearly see and receive from God.
That's good. And this right here, I'm going to just add on that. This right here is for free for you guys. No human being can change another human being.
That's right.
No human being can change another human being. You clap. My wife and I, we've done some premarital counseling with some couples where I was during their wedding, and I always ask them this question right here. If the person you're marrying, if nothing about that person changed from this point on, could you still see yourself with them forever? Right. And sometimes when I ask that question, you see like they thinking through this other, that thing he does that like, I just want to like, and because the fact of the matter is that you're marrying the person that they are, not necessarily the person that they are becoming, that they can become. Well, Pastor M, he got vision, he got goals, and he got this idea for this business, but he just don't got a job right now, but he doesn't have a resume either. No. He's not applying for a job. He's at home playing video games all day trying to learn the new Fortnite dances. Nah. If that never changed, could you see yourself with that person forever. And because we can't change another person, that person's change has to be a sincere change.
That's right.
If I see that I'm doing something that offends my wife or make her feel a certain way, no matter how much she tells me about it, nags me about it, worries me about it, that's not going to make me want to change. That's not going to make the change happen.
Right.
But if I see that as bothering her, and I value her and I esteem her feelings, and I'm thinking about her above myself, guess what? I'll begin to make that change because I value how she feels. So that change has to be a sincere change. It has to be for the right reasons. And so speaking of sincere change and change for the right reason, I want to take a look at this letter from a guy named Frank that he wrote to his former fiance. And I'm going to read it verbatim because this is really heartfelt. I want y'all to catch the heart of this. Sweetie of my heart, I've been so desolate ever since I broke off our engagement. Simply devastated. Won't you please consider coming back to me? You hold a place in my heart no other woman can fill. I can never marry another woman quite like you. I need you so much. Man, this brother begging like Keith Sweat. Yeah. Won't you forgive me and let us make a new beginning? I love you so. Yours always and truly, Frank. Man, so hard. Hold on, I left something out. Oh, P.S. Congratulations on winning the North Carolina State Lottery. Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't know about.
I'm not too sure how sincere that.
Yeah, I don't know. That
Yeah, I don't
sound pretty lucrative, like he making money moves.
Yeah,
but
right.
yeah, I don't.
That's
yeah,
right.
Okay,
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, all right. Well.
But there's a flip side. The opposite of flexibility is rigidity.
Yeah.
And so the dictionary definition of rigidity is unable to bend, unable to change, or to be adapted. So another way to put it is your unwillingness to change.
That's right. Rigid things may not be able to change, but rigid people can change. They just have an unwillingness to be flexible. And as we just discussed, because flexible people are willing to change, they can grow. They can find ways to interact and work together to find win-win scenarios. Flexible people tend to respond versus react. They can create solutions that benefit everybody, all parties involved. And this is something that I preach because I interface with young people all the time, and I hear them telling me about them getting in trouble in school or in trouble at home with their parents because something was said or was done, and they react versus respond. I tell them, learn to respond, don't react. See, when we respond, we consider how it affects everyone. But when we react, we're only concerned with how it affects us. Our arrows are pointed inward. When we react, we are prone to be less likely to think through things or process it properly for the matter at hand. Response says, you disrespected me, but look, let's talk about it. Let me let you know why I was offended. Let's find some resolve so we can move on and this doesn't happen again. React says, you disrespected me, so now I'm about to disrespect you. Okay, so now we fighting. Like, that's usually how that escalates. So we want to respond versus react. Flexibility requires people to learn new things and new ways of operating, and this produces growth opportunities. Flexibility, the willingness to change, is a core quality of mature people. Rigid people are unable to see solutions to conflicts other than their own. It's my way or it's the highway. There's no other way to do it but the way that I want to do it. Rigid people become rigid because they see no reason to change, and a lot of times they give lip service this thing. Like it's the new year, 2019, and every year they got the same resolution because they just give lip service to it. Hey, this year, you know what it's going to be? It's going to be new for me. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to cut out this, and then they just talk about it, but they don't see change. And we see that they find themselves stuck in predictable patterns. Being rigid is a sign of an immature person, and a lot of times people want to keep their distance from that individual. And in just a moment, you'll see, we'll talk about the Pharisees, and rigidity was the chief characteristic of the Pharisees. They were in search of God, but they missed it in the Messiah because they wanted him to come the way that they wanted him to come.
Right. And also, sometimes rigid people are people who used to be flexible, but they just cease growing. They stopped growing. They're not growing anymore. And they feel like they're fine the way they are. So they become stuck in the way they see life, further reducing the potential for growth emotionally and therefore spiritually.
So we're talking about rigid people, their unwillingness to change. So
Right.
for that person sitting here and saying, okay, there's some things that are kind of tied into my moral fiber, like it's in my character,
Right.
like I won't budge on this. Like, rigid, like explain that a little bit.
Right. So I don't want you to get mixed up with being rigid and being rooted.
Okay.
So being rigid is an unwillingness to change, causing hindrance to growth.
Okay.
Being rooted is to be established deeply and firmly in something that will cultivate your growth. So, for example, you're rooted in God's word and you believe everything it says, and you've made the decision to walk in purity and abstinence until you get married. So then when John, or Keisha, whoever he is in your face trying to tempt you, talk to you or whatever, you flee, you reject it because you're rooted in something that gives and brings you life, and anything that hinders that, you don't want any parts of it.
That's a good word. That's a good word.
Thank you.
And sometimes rigid people, they believe that you can change too much.
Right.
Let's take Bill, for example. Bill, he was approaching kind of midlife, putting on little pounds around the midsection, losing a little bit of hair. But he still had a little bit of confidence. So he asked this young lady out at his job, and she did all but pretty much laugh in his face. And so his esteem was hurt a little bit, but he said, you know what, I'm gonna make some changes. So he got a gym membership, started eating right, got some expensive kind of like hair transplants, got a new wardrobe, started changing some things up. About 6 months later, asked the same young lady out again. This time, she said yes. I know, kind of shallow, right?
Very shallow.
Yeah. So but either way, maybe not for him. He shows up to the date. He got a new wardrobe. He looking like new money. He rings the doorbell, and then boom, all of a sudden, struck by lightning, knocked off his feet. And so now he's laying there. He's dying. He looks up to the heavens and he says, Lord, why now? After everything I've been through, after all the changes that I've made, why now? And it's like a voice came from above and said, Bill, is that you? Man, I ain't even recognize you. See, changed too much. Changed too much. But the bottom line is this. Flexible people grow into the future. Rigid people are stuck in perpetual patterns of the past.
Now we're going to look at some contrast and then get into some Bible study. So if you're flexible, you want to get right. If you're rigid, you want to be right.
Fellas, if you don't know this, I need you, before you leave the day, embed this in your brain. Like, you don't always got to be right. This is one of those scenarios where even when you win, sometimes you might actually lose. And some ladies, you're not always right, but for the sake of argument, I'm talking to the fellas.
No.
So fellas, you don't always have to be right, but make sure you always make it right. That makes sense? Get on one accord.
If you're flexible, you value relationships. If you're rigid, you value rules. So rigid people value principles over people.
See, that's why I don't even go to McDonald's anymore.
Why?
I don't. Like, McDonald's is all about rules. I haven't been to McDonald's like 3 years. But you come to McDonald's, you go through the drive-thru, they got their rules listed on the window. They tell you how many sauces they're going to give you based on the number of nuggets you order. And how dare you ask for another sauce if you're a heavy dipper, they're going to charge you 25 cents. Rules. But Chick-fil-A, on the other hand, my God. You don't even have to have chicken nuggets. You just want to dip your fries in it. Ma'am, can I get 5 Polynesian sauce? I just want to have some at the house. No questions asked. They handed it to you. What they tell you?
My pleasure.
My pleasure, with a smile on their face. People over principle. At McDonald's, other way around.
And that's real life for him too.
Yeah. I hate they
chicken
ain't
nuggets
open
and Polynesian sauce.
Hate they ain't open today.
If you're flexible, you are able to release creativity to others and allow them to have space for their gifts.
Right.
But if you're rigid, you require compliance. It's pretty much a control issue. If you're flexible, you seek to understand truth. And if you're rigid, you're stuck in tradition. I'm sorry, if you're rigid, you find yourself stuck in tradition. So it's like, I've been doing this for the last 20 years. There's no need for me to change this. My mom and them, that's how they taught me, and that's how it's going to be. But the arrows are pointed inward, and they don't care how it affects anyone else around them.
Right. Let's take a look at Ephesians chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. I, therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. Now, take a look in these next 2 verses that we're going to read. We're going to look at some attitudes, and these attitudes are going to require flexibility. Verse 2, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another and love. I feel like somebody in the room needs me to read that last part
Read it
one
again.
more time.
Try it again.
With patience, bearing with one another in love. Mom, why little brother always got to come with me? He's so annoying. I just want to hit him. No. With patience, bearing with one another in love. Man, I tell you, if they ask me one more time on my job to do something that's not in my job description, I'm going to scream. Oh, no. With patience, bearing with one another in love. I tell you, if this lady at the DMV gets snippy with me one more time, I'm going to turn this place out because she don't know I'm bilingual. I speak English and cuss. No. Calm it down. With patience, bearing with one another in love. Somebody needed that for this week. Somebody needed that for this week. Verse 3. Eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. This is true for us. This is true for churches, for families, for organizations, for businesses. We got to be willing to be flexible. To move ahead, we have to learn to work together. And when we're working with people, we got to understand that people are going to be people. Like, people are flawed. We're flawed. We're not perfect. But being able to work through those challenges and those issues and those pressures, those are the very things that help us grow and help us mature.
That's right. In Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 3, it reads, "If then you have been raised with Christ, so if you are a believer, seek the things that are above. This will require you to change, to become like him. Therefore, you will need to be flexible." If you're rigid, we're really not talking to you right here. "Seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God." So notice here, this passage speaks to your spirituality, but it's all about your mindset, which is also a part of your soul. So, to be growing and developing spiritually, you'll need to be healthy in your soul. So once again, back to the principle and the point of this series is, if you aren't healthy spiritually, you aren't and you can't be healthy emotionally.
It's good. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. "I appeal to you, brothers, by the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be united in the same mind and the same judgment." This can only be a reality when flexibility is present. Paul is speaking to the Corinthians, and because there was this mindset of rigidity among them, there was division. They're saying, I'm of this, and I'm of that, and I'm of this, and it created division among them. And I love how the Holy Spirit works. I don't find it to be a coincidence or by chance that we just read that passage of Paul, and he's telling them you should be in agreement. There should be no division. We should be on the same page of one mind. And this series of flexibility that was already on the calendar, it falls smack dab in the holiday weekend where we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a man who stood for unity, who marched for equality, who spoke up for those without a voice in a time where the nation, there was a lot of rigidity. And that's the mindset that we have to have. And in order for that to happen, there's some things that have to take place. The first thing is we must elevate agreement over anger. We must look to find solutions, to get on the same page and not let our feelings and emotions get the best of us and let those things escalate, but come to common ground. The second thing is embrace diversity over division. You don't look like me. We don't talk the same way. We come from different backgrounds. Our cultures are different. You're gifted and talented in some areas that I wish I could be, but I'm gifted and talented in some areas that work better for what it is that I'm called to do. But what if we embrace the beauty of that diversity? Like, think about the impact that could take place in our schools, in our cities, in our community, in our churches, and even closer right here, like in our homes. Like, what if mom and dad were on the same page and modeled that in front of their children? Like, you know, dad is stern and strict, and mom is like a little, ooh, she's out there. But they're different in their personalities and the things they like to do, but they're able to come together and operate as one. Think about that picture of Jesus that demonstrates to other people. Think about how that is modeled, what that looks like to their children, where they can see the differences in mom and dad, but they don't fight in front of them, and they have those conversations not in front of them, and they can see that picture depicted to them. The third thing is establish unity over unilateral demands. Consider what will benefit everyone, not just yourself. And the last thing, and what we've been driving home in this message in this week is esteem flexibility over rigidity.
In Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, it reads, "So if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort from love, any participation in the Spirit, any affection and sympathy, complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind." Here we see the same principle again. This requires flexibility to live this way.
Right.
Do nothing from rivalry or conceit. And this is pride, and it's honestly the driving force behind why some people are rigid and why they remain rigid. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Again, flexibility is required here. The willingness to change, the openness to bend, to adjust to others, to bend without breaking. Verse 5, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus. This is so key. Notice what he's saying here. He's saying, be like Jesus. Be spiritual, but you can't get there to true spirituality without this emotional quality of flexibility.
That's good. I think we would all agree that Paul is a spiritual guy. And so let's look and see how Paul lived his life. In 1 Corinthians chapter 9, we're going to start at verse 19 and read down to verse 23. For though I am free from all, even though I can mostly do whatever I want to do, but I don't. Instead, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. Verse 20, to the Jews I became as a Jew in order to win the Jews. To those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. To those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside of the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. Get what Paul is saying here. He said, I'm able to be flexible. I'm able to find common ground with everyone, mainly, pretty much. I'm able to find areas where we can connect and build relationship, and we can have conversations. There's that common ground. And don't get this mixed up and say, oh, well, Paul's reaching sinners, so he's sinning. No, it's not like they turning up, I'm turning up. That's not what's happening here. He's finding commonality where he can connect with them. So if this were today, Paul might say, hey, y'all like going to the sports bar? Y'all watching the game? Guess what? I like wings. I want to see the game too. I'm going where they going. Y'all going to hoop? Y'all going to play ball? Y'all just got them new Air Jesuses. They sitting on the right hand of the Father. I'm ready. Yo, let's go hoop. Let's go do it. He's going where the people are who he is called to reach. And you might say, Paul, you're over there, and Paul, you're being flexible to connect with these people over here. Why are you doing all that? Verse 23. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessing. Paul it's all for the sake of the gospel. We used to have a small group here. It was a basketball small group. It started off with just some guys from the church, and then over time, the word got out to some of the kids, the students in the area, and within 2 or 3 weeks, there was 50, 60 people there, and only 2 or 3 of them were from the church. And so but there were great things that were happening in this small group. People were being invited to church. People were getting saved, all at this basketball small group. And a lot of times it was at the court, not even at the church. And this is the same mindset of being flexible. Where are the people that I'm called to reach? What would this look like if we modeled this in our everyday life? Who is God? Who might God be calling you to reach? And how might you have to be flexible in order to reach them, to have an opportunity to be able to share the good news of Jesus Christ with them? So talk about flexibility and having that emotional maturity. This is the key characteristic that Paul had to have that makes him the spiritual giant that we know him as. And so as we look to close, we're going to close with a story I believe that most of us in here are pretty familiar with, and it's the story of the woman caught in adultery that we read about in John.
In John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, it reads, But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning, he came again to the temple. All the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees, remember the Pharisees are the picture of what it is to be rigid, right, brought a woman who had been caught in adultery and placing her in the midst. These people are clearly principle over people oriented. They weren't interested in restoring the woman. They only brought the woman.
Right. Last time I checked, I thought it takes two to make a thing go right.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
That's
Yeah,
what I
that's
heard
what I
too.
thought, yeah.
But they were just trying to publicly humiliate her to make a point.
Right.
In verse 4 it says, they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. So what do you say?" Notice, Jesus never says anything about the law. He said that he has come to fulfill the law in the Sermon on the Mount of Olives. Yeah. So he is interested in how the law is applied. The Pharisees sees it as a set of rules by which to judge, but Jesus, he sees it as a scalpel that brings pain to conviction so we can all be set free.
That's good.
Verse 6, this they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. So no one knows exactly what he wrote, but we'll see in just a minute that we believe that it was progressively personal.
Yeah, let's pick up in verse 7. And as they continue to ask him, he stood up. And I believe he looked each one of them in the eye, seeing who is accusing this woman. And he said to them, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." Verse 8. And once more he bent down and he wrote on the ground. And again, we don't know exactly what he wrote, but I can see him listing names and dates and times and places and sins. Verse 9. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. See, the longer we live, the easier it is for us to see how holy we're not. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. So I actually believe that the Pharisees, they got it this time. I believe that they passed this test. They needed a little bit of coaching, a little bit of steering, but I think they passed this test. Verse 10, Jesus stood up and said to her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on, sin no more."
That is such an awesome and powerful story.
Yeah.
So as we close this message, we do have a couple of takeaway questions so that you can give just a little bit of thought to when you're in your own personal time. The first question is, when you're right and you know you're right, how do you handle it? Do you handle it with grace or judgment, or are you people over principle first? Second question, when it's time to make a decision, is it all about the past and how you used to do it? Are you open to new ideas? Does it always have to be your way?
And the last question to give some thought to, and this one we want to make a bit personal. Ask yourself, am I good like I am? Like, how is your heart postured towards that question? Have I no need to change, or am I desperate for change? Those who feel they are good like they are, they require everyone to conform to be like them. Those who are desperate to change and have a willingness to change, they conform to be like him. Let's pray.